Last episode, we met a woman who didn't just tell her story. She echoed something inside us. Bethany's silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything that she was never allowed to say. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't for applause. It was for release. This episode is the reflection that comes after the reckoning, the stillness after the storm, because what her story opened wasn't just about her, it was about all of us, about the parts of us that know what it's like to be invisible, to carry pain like it's a secret, to wear masks so well that we forget that they're not our face. Today's episode is a conversation between your story and your silence. It's the lessons we're still learning, the habits we're rebuilding, the healing that we now understand differently because someone else had the courage to speak first. This isn't a recap. This is the response. Welcome to the wisdom. Welcome to the mirror. This is the wisdom in the wreckage. Now let us begin. Not all healing begins with a scream. Sometimes it begins with the quiet moments after. The pause, the breath that catches in your throat because you finally felt something that you weren't supposed to name. Last episode, Bethany didn't just share her story, she mirrored ours. And today we're not rehashing her pain, we're reckoning with what it stirred in us. Because silence isn't always absence. Sometimes it's presence, the presence of truth that we buried too deep. This episode isn't about a story, it's about the wisdom underneath of the story. What silence has taught us, what survival has cost us. And what happens when you finally stop shrinking to be acceptable. And you start expanding to be free. Bethany's story taught us that truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. Silence is often misunderstood. We think that if someone isn't speaking up, they must not know what to say. Or worse, they have nothing to say. But the truth is, silence is rarely about a lack of voice. It's about a lack of a safe space for that voice to land. And when you've spent a lifetime walking on eggshells or shrinking yourself to be more acceptable or more digestible, your voice doesn't just disappear, it goes into hiding. It burrows itself into the body, it clutches the throat, it curls into the belly, it lives in the tension behind your eyes. It waits, not because it's weak, but because it's wise. It knows the cost of premature truth, of speaking into rooms where your soul will be misheard or mistranslated. Silence then becomes this sacred cocoon, a place of gestation, not absence, preparation. Your voice is still there, your truth is still burning, but it's waiting for you to reclaim the safety to hold it. To trust yourself enough to speak, not for the applause, not to be believed, but simply because you finally believe yourself. And when that happens, when your body feels safe, when your heart feels steady, your voice doesn't need to roar. It simply arrives. Clear, grounded, unapologetic, not for show, but for truth. And that kind of truth, that's the kind that moves mountains. Bethany's story also taught us that self-abandonment isn't just emotional. It's also very much energetic. Most people think of self-abandonment as a mental or emotional experience, making yourself smaller to please others, saying yes when you mean to say no, hiding your needs to keep the peace, and that is all true, but there's also a deeper layer. Self-abandonment lives in your energy body. It's what happens when your spirit checks out of your physical form. When you smile, but your eyes aren't really there. When your body shows up, but your soul stays behind a locked door. It's what makes you feel numb during joyful moments or exhausted after every interaction. It's what keeps your shoulders tense even when nothing's wrong. Because deep down, you're still waiting for the other shoe to drop. We all do this to survive, to stay loved, to stay safe, but over time, that disconnection becomes default. You become a silhouette of yourself, well-behaved, polite, pleasing, but hollow. And you wait for someone else to fill you in, to choose you, to reflect you back to yourself, and that is the trap. The truth is, no one else can re-inhabit you. No relationship, no title, no amount of external validation can replace the sacred act of returning to your own body, of breathing all the way down into your belly, of feeling your own presence so fully that you no longer need to be seen to feel real. Reclaiming yourself is an energetic act. It's when your soul says, I'm home now. And from that place, you don't just exist, you inhabit, you show up fully, and life meets you there. Bethany also taught us that the things that broke you become the things that build you. The things that broke you become the things that build you. There's a dangerous myth that healing happens automatically with time. That if you just keep going, the pain will eventually fade, but some wounds don't just vanish. They mature. They become part of you, not as scars to hide, but as symbols of initiation. The truth is, what broke you will not magically build you unless you decide to pick up the pieces on purpose. Unless you decide to pick up the pieces on purpose. Unless you sit with the wreckage and ask yourself, what part of this is still in me? What am I holding that was never mine to carry? Maybe it's shame inherited by someone else's actions. Maybe it's the silence that you kept to survive a childhood that didn't make space for your emotions. Maybe it's the mask that you wore so long you forgot it was not your face. You don't get to skip that step. The breaking must be witnessed before it can be rebuilt. But Bethany taught us something very important about the sacred part. Once you name it, once you hold it in your hands and face it without flinching, something shifts. The pain that once swallowed you becomes a path you can walk others through. The pain that once swallowed you becomes a path that you can walk others through. The wound that once weakened you becomes your most powerful source of empathy. The story that once silenced you becomes your medicine. That's the alchemy of reckoning, not just surviving what hurt you, but using it to become more whole. Not in spite of what you lost, but because you met yourself in the losing. Bethany allowed us to witness the transformation of going from the kept silence wound to the voice of peace, healing. Truth swallowed to keep the peace becomes truth spoken to restore the peace. This wound forms with the belief that your silence is safer than your truth. This wound forms when you learned that honesty could cost you love. When you learned that your feelings made things worse. When you became so quiet, not out of stillness, but out of fear. You carried unspoken truths like bricks on your chest. You learned to nod when you wanted to scream. To hold your breath in moments that begged for your voice. But over time, that silence didn't protect your peace, it fractured it. Because real peace doesn't come from avoidance, it comes from alignment. The shift begins when you realize you don't need to raise your voice to raise your truth. You don't need to explode to express. You can speak with a steady grace, with a grounded heart, with love in your tone, but fire in your backbone. And that is the voice of peace, not passive, not pleasing, but powerful and clear. You learn to choose discomfort over disconnection. To say what needs to be said, not to hurt, but to heal. Because peace that requires your silence is not peace. Peace that requires your silence is not peace. And your truth was never too much. It was just waiting for a space where it could finally be safe, where it could finally be held. Bethany showed us how to transform from being the invisible one to the witnessed soul. Being unseen, unchosen, and unrecognized becomes fully felt, deeply known, self-reflected. The invisible one wound forms when your presence goes unnoticed. You were there, but not seen. Loved, maybe, but not understood. Chosen when convenient. Praised only when perfect, and dismissed when different. And so you began to fade. Not physically, but spiritually. You dimmed your light to match the room. Like, let's be really honest about that. You dimmed your light to match the room. You made yourself small enough to be tolerated, thinking that that was the same as being loved. But invisibility is not your birthright. It is a bruise left by people who could not meet you where you were. And something sacred happens when you stop trying to be chosen and choose yourself instead. You meet your own reflection and you feel it. You stop searching for a mirror in other people and you become the witness that you always needed. The witnessed soul doesn't demand attention. They command presence by being present. Fully in the body, fully in the breath, fully aware of their worth without needing anyone else to validate it. When you live as the witnessed soul, you don't just take up space, you inhabit it. And in doing so, you invite others to do the same. Bethany showed us the transformation of going from the masked child to the wholehearted healer. The masked child wound forms when there is innocence hidden to protect the heart. But that becomes authenticity revealed to restore it. This is the wound that begins early, when the world tells you who you should be before you know who you are. So you adapt. You perform. You wear the smile. You follow the rules. You read the room. You learn which parts of you are acceptable and which parts are too much. And slowly, layer by layer, the mask forms. At first, it feels like armor. It keeps you safe, liked, needed. But over time, it begins to suffocate. Because a life built on performance will always ache with emptiness. The breakthrough happens not when you take the mask off once, but when you learn to live without needing it. You meet the child underneath, the sensitive one, the intuitive one, the one who felt too deeply, who loved too loudly, and needed to be held in ways the world didn't know how to. When you choose to love that version of yourself, not fix her, not silence her, but honor her, you become the wholehearted healer. You no longer pretend. You no longer shapeshift. You no longer teach others to abandon themselves by modeling your own self-erasure. Instead, you show up raw. You hold space not as someone who has never been broken, but as someone who remembers the sound of their own cracking and still chose to rebuild. And now your authenticity becomes your offering. Your tenderness becomes your strength. And your story becomes someone else's permission to be real too. Bethany's story taught us that you can run from the pain. You can dodge it. You can dress it up. You can distract yourself from it. You can stay busy enough to forget, silent enough to survive, numb enough to keep functioning in a world that praises your performance but never asks for your peace. You can deny the ache. You can tell yourself it wasn't that bad. You can call it the past and pretend it doesn't echo. Pretend you're over it, even though your body still remembers every room you had to shrink in just to be tolerated. You can wear the mask so long it starts to look like your skin. Smile out of habit, say I'm fine out of fear. Play the role that you were handed before you knew you had a choice. And maybe you'll even get really good at it. So good that they'll never know that you've been gone. So good that you'll almost forget what your real voice sounds like beneath the script. But eventually, silence catches up to you. And not the comforting kind. Not the silence of stillness or serenity. No, this is the kind of silence that confronts you. The kind that walks into the room like a ghost wearing your face. The kind that turns down the volume of the world so that you can hear the one voice that you've been ignoring, your own. And when that silence comes, it doesn't come to shame you. It doesn't scold you for the times that you've hid, for the words that you've swallowed, for the love that you begged for in places that only knew how to withhold. It comes to free you. It comes to crack the shell that you've outgrown, to peel back the layers of survival that once protected you. But now they only prevent you from being fully alive. Because silence isn't your enemy, it is a mirror. Silence isn't your enemy, it is your mirror. And in that mirror, you don't just see the wounds, you see the person who lived through them, who carried it all, who kept showing up even when no one was watching, even when it wasn't pretty, even when it hurt to stay soft in a world that made you hard. That mirror, that's your resurrection. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. Because it's not for anyone else. It's for you. For the you who finally stops running, finally sees themselves clearly, and finally whispers, I'm still here. And I'm ready to begin. Starting today, no more apologizing for healing. No more making yourself small to be loved. No more dimming so that others can feel comfortable. The life that you want isn't a reward for being good. It's a right that you reclaim when you decide that you are enough right now. No more waiting for permission. You are the author now. You are the resurrection in progress. Maybe what broke you wasn't the pain, but the silence that followed. The part where no one asked. No one stayed. No one noticed that something inside of you went quiet and never came back. But today, maybe a piece of you did come back. Maybe it wasn't loud. Maybe it didn't roar. Maybe it whispered. And that whisper was you. You showed up today. You sat with the feelings. You listened to the ache, or even just let the words land on your skin a little longer than usual. And that matters. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to keep returning. Returning to your voice, returning to your body, returning to the truth that even if the silence hurt you, it can also heal you. You are not broken. You are becoming. And maybe, just maybe, what was once your wreckage is now your resurrection. Thank you again so much to Bethany for sharing your heart and your story, your wisdom. And thank you to everyone for listening. Our guest next week will be Ryan, and I am so excited to share her energy and her story with all of you as well. You can find the full episodes of the podcast Humans for Humanity on the Reckoning Co. YouTube channel. Thank you everyone for listening, and I will see you soon.